Award-winning author A.M. Delamonica's newest novels, Game Changer and Deal Breaker, were released under the name Lex Beckett. They are solar punk adventures that imagine humanity surviving climate change and creating a post-carbon economy. Lex, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I just want to say before I start reading that this book was written, and I'm reading it today, on the ancestral and traditional territory of the Mississauga of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of this land on which I have the good fortune to live and create. Chapter 1. The Surface, West Euro Densification Zone, Metro Paris, May 2101. Cherub Whiting's first real-world police raid was nothing like The Sims. She was in a chic Parisian neighborhood with a view of the Eiffel Tower, waiting on a meeting. When Interpol showed up in her pop-in conference room, she had been sending pings to a no-show client for the better part of an hour. "Luce, you're late. Luce, it's time for our face-to-face. Where are you?" He'd be afraid to skip, wouldn't he? By the time someone's social capital got so bad they merited a face-to-face meeting, one involving the horrifying carbon cost of flying a lawyer from Toronto to West Euro, no less, they were desperate to get life back on track. Failure to appear was unheard of. The drag of jet lag had left Ruby mentally fogged. It dawned only slowly that she was obsessing. "Can I get a volunteer gig while I wait, Crane?" Her electronic sidekick had obviously been expecting the request. "A radish pallet across the hall has requested weeding and watering." Crane's crisp voice, transmitted via tiny implanted earbuds, had a British accent. He sounded like he was at her shoulder. Its usual gardener had an emergency. Accept task. Ruby's visual implant superimposed the mirage of a yellow arrow onto the floor, mapping the way to a conference room big enough for 12. The pallet of seedlings in question had been abandoned mid-job. Thumb-sized plants with leaves like propellers ruffled in a breeze from the open window. Beyond them, the streets of Paris beckoned. Ruby felt a pang for whoever had been tending the radishes. "Run tutorial?" "I remember how to weed radishes, Crane." Nudging aside a delicate stem with her thumbnail, she isolated one of the undesirables, tugging it from the soil. "See?" "Very good, miss." Where was Luce? If they couldn't convince Cloudsight that he could behave pro-socially, he would be remanded to managed care, relocation to the outskirts, mandatory labor on an ecosphere rehab project, topsoil generation, probably, and censored comms. It was a prison sentence in all but name. You can't make him appear, Ruby told herself. Breathe, pull weeds, enjoy the solitude. Heavy boots pounding up the double stairwell double time filled her with relief. Finally. Crane spoke, momentarily drowning out the elephant stampede. "Miss Cherub, call for you." "Is it Dad?" "Your father's fine. The call is from your arch nemesis." "That's not funny." "No, I'll make a note. Gimlet Barnes is not my arch." Clomp, 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 bang. An armored band charged through the door. Ruby pivoted, squaring off to face the threat and brandishing a fistful of weeds. The move was reflexive, triggered by hours logged in game. Plus, maybe the mention of Gimlet. If this had been a game, her implants would have augmented the white-walled meeting room until it was unrecognizable, frosting visuals and sound over mundane reality, porting her into play space. A dungeon, maybe, a space station, or a canyon in the mythical American Wild West. Instead, the walls lit up with official warnings. Posters scrolled on the plaster, red and black placards. Police line, do not cross. Don't move! A cop? Luce couldn't be a cop, could he, with his social deficits? Official directives crawled the posters. Remain in place, wait for instructions. Ruby had risen to her toes, prepped for rolling left if he attacked. Heart slamming, she scanned for weapons. Like what? A crossbow? Holy water? 2 cameras and a pacification bot drifted over her radishes. "Stand down, mademoiselle! Stand down now!" Ruby lowered her fists. Of course this policeman wasn't Luce. He was a stranger. "Handsome stranger," noted an inner voice. "Damn it, stay on task." Complying as ordered. He was tall and olive-skinned, with flyaway hair, the color of charcoal, and forbidding features, sharp nose, steely eyes. A protective vest over the base layer of nanosilk he wore as a primer garment left her to imagine the details of his physique. His bot was armed with a joy buzzer, third-generation taser tech. Dad claimed a good jolt would make you wish you'd die. Interpol must have a warrant because the building hadn't warned Crane that he was coming. As this thought gelled, a badge resolved on the wall. Interpol Special Ops Agent Anselmo Javier. Pronouns, he, him. Cloud site respectability rating, 67%. Agent Javier checked under the old hardwood table, then peered inside a closet filled with folding chairs. I'm going to search the rest of the floor, he said. Wait here, s'il vous plaît. He left Ruby alone with the drones. Feigning calm, she peered beyond the radishes to the street. Zoom views from other cameras let her clock a half dozen meandering residents and tourists. So, tourists, civilians, weren't being diverted away from the scene. Still, there were at least a dozen drones lurking in the shadows, and her mouth went dry. An autonomous sniper bristling with tranq darts was tucked into a balcony across the street. It had its sights on her. As she clocked it, the nanotech primer on its exterior changed color. It blended in with a building pediment covered in anti-pigeon spikes. As it all but vanished, Ruby felt goosebumps coming up on her arms. A gun, an actual gun. Crane murmured, "Isn't this how that 1942 simulation started out?" "That was a game," Ruby said. Still, she let the memory raise a smile. Wild with exhaustion, she had torn through a VR sim of occupied Paris, meeting contacts, passing messages, and setting garlic traps for Vichy vampires. It was the only time in her life she had let life and sensorium swamp her studies, had ignored school and all her surface obligations. She should have been memorizing social infraction case precedents before her next law exam unlocked. Instead, she stayed online for 18 hours, sabotaging trains and stealing bomb plans. The deal breaker had been her so-called arch nemesis. Gimlet Barnes had been brought in by Risto Games in a last-minute twist to lead a team of German necromancers hunting her resistance cell. Ruby had lost big in their previous battle, a superhero thing. She'd apparently lost perspective, too. Once Gimlet was in, there was no chance she'd stop, not even for a better shot at leveling her mashup of careers into a single perma-job as a public defender. Thrill of adrenaline, rat-a-tat of machine guns, crossbow-driven stakes, sim blood spraying as buildings collapsed, players and audience tuning in by the tens of thousands. Stone tumbling to drive a pall of dust skyward, thick enough to curtain the moonlight. Howling werewolf choruses, bone-shaking glass of shellfire stripping the air to gunpowder-laced sandpaper. But never again, Crane. And I will leave it there.